Okay, so let's start off this particular session. Let me just press record. So thank you so much for joining in today. We're looking at doing an assignment discussion session, which is predominantly on the unit 6, and this is personal and professional development in health and social care sector. Now, this unit, has an assignment. There are 4 tasks in the assignment, rather 3 tasks in the assignment, and these 3 tasks cover all the 4 learning outcomes, which are predominantly, given in the unit specification that we've used for the discussion of our unit. Now, if I share my full screen, for those of you who are essentially, obviously looking at joining this on the mobile phone, you might find the screen to be a bit small, but what I'm going to do is try and minimize, all the windows. But what I want to do is basically give you a bit of a screenshot first and an overview of how we are looking at doing the discussion on the assignment, simply because I need to show you all the bits that we are going to cover, and they would be helpful for you to look at getting a macro view of how we are going to be looking at this particular unit and the assignment for this particular unit. So I've got a few more learners joining in, which I'll keep accepting as we come along. And what we are looking at is a couple of things. One, I want to show you the unit specification, which is something that we look at, because when we do the discussion, primarily it is done using that. And then is when I would look at getting into the assignment to discuss some of these activities as we go along, in order to ensure that you are able to then follow the doing of the assignment tasks. So I've got this more or less in order, and what I want to do now is share the full screen, which will allow us to see pretty much everything as we go along, from a point of view of discussing this assignment. Now, those of you who are using it or are basically joining the session on the mobile phone, what I would suggest is if you turn this to a landscape mode, that will allow essentially you to see a bit of a wider screen, and hopefully that should fit in what I'm trying to show on the windows when I share my full screen. So I've got 3 documents open, which I want to look at for the purposes of discussion today, and they are in no particular order, but here we go. So you should see my full screen now. Now, I've got 3 documents which are open essentially. One is the unit specification that we look at here, and this is something that we were looking at, using for discussing during, let's say the sessions that we did for covering the topic and the indicative content. The second document that you see here essentially is what is the assignment brief, which is what the awarding body issues, and what they tend to do with that is basically convert some of the learning outcomes that we see here, various learning outcomes and assessment criteria. So LOs and AC, as we call them, they convert them into what are called tasks. And these tasks are like question answer sessions that we need to be able to discuss and, obviously cover from a point of view of creating evidence to, finish this unit or, do our assignment. So in this particular unit, if we see there are 4 learning outcomes, and these 4 learning outcomes here in the assignment brief have been converted into, 3 particular tasks. There's a bit of a scenario which has been given, which we will discuss. Task 1 covers some part of the assessment criteria of learning outcome 1 and learning outcome 2. Task 2 covers a lot of assessment criteria for learning outcome 2, 3, and 4. And task 3 covers some of the remaining assessment criteria for task learning outcome 1, 3, and 4. So what they've done is essentially in the assignment brief, they have combined some of the activities to make it flow so that you don't need to repeatedly produce the evidence while you go ahead and compile the evidence for this particular unit as an assignment. Now, all the tasks and all the assignments, all the tasks given in the assignment follow the same assessment criteria. So they will exactly be the same wordings. So it says write an outline of range of careers and job roles in health and social care. It is the same task as you can see here. And obviously, when we look at individual bullet points, they correspond to the different assessment criteria which they are covering, including the learning outcomes. So the first bullet point covers 1.1. The second bullet point, which talks about explain progression, covers 1.2. And then the third one, which talks about identify standards related to professional development, covers task 2.1. And then similarly, I go forward in task 2. There are a couple of bullet points. They will cover, tasks 2.2, 3.1, 3.2. So this one is 2.2. This point is 3.1, 3.2, and they can clearly be seen that they are exactly the same. There is no change in the way they have been written, but they have been ordered in such a way by ATHE so that for you, when you do the assignment, when you write the assignment, it'll be more meaningful, because they are you're doing so in a very chronological order, which follows one activity, and the output of one activity then leads to the input, or relates to the output of other activity. So there are this unit is graded. That is the first point which I want to make, just to re-emphasize that there is a pass, there is a merit, or there is a distinction grade that you can achieve. For achieving the pass grade, you'll have to do all the pass tasks across all the assessment criteria, all the learning outcomes, and that would get you a pass. But when you need to look at achieving a merit, you have to do pass plus merit, all the merit activities, to be able to achieve an overall merit in the unit. And if you're looking at achieving the highest grade, which is distinction, that means you're looking at pretty much doing all the assessment criteria given across pass, merit, and distinction to be able to complete and achieve this particular unit with the distinction grade. Now, in the assignment brief, the pass tasks are normally listed under the tasks, and the extension activities would typically be highlighting the merit or the distinction grade which has to be attempted to be able to achieve. So if you look at task 1, there is no merit and distinction criteria. That's why task 1 is just simple. There is no extension activity listed. But when I look at task 2, there is a one merit activity and there is nothing in terms of distinction. So when I look at task 2, obviously analyze the benefits of reflective practice, which is 3D1 is actually here. And that is where the extension activities have been grouped and they merged together. Because when we look at developing a plan for continuous professional development, you can also go ahead and analyze, some of the benefits of reflective practice, because the CPD is a plan which reflects the progress that you're making in terms of the activities that you put together to be able to develop skills, or make improvements in certain areas that you've listed down and identified in the personal and professional development plan initially in task 1. And then when we look at task 3, obviously there is one merit criteria which is given essentially in the 4 learning outcome 4, and that is listed here, and it's clubbed with you being able to carry out your skills audit, and that allows you to essentially achieve all the criteria in the task. Now, what I normally do for the purposes of discussion of the assignment session, what I do is basically not look at the unit specification, because the unit specification is converted into the assignment brief in terms of having tasks, and then this I convert into what is called a PowerPoint presentation, so that it's easier for us to understand what is required to be done and how we are going to achieve and compile the evidence for this particular unit as an assignment. So now what I'm going to do is obviously share just the presentation, because that will make it easier for us to discuss. But before you start your assignments at your end, it is always useful to have these 2 documents in hand, so that you know exactly what we have covered, in what learning outcome, in what presentation this part has been covered. So it's easy for you to quickly recognize. So the reason I have this, and if I open, the Moodle as well, for those of you who go into the Moodle and look at this particular, unit, what you're going to be able to see is that essentially when we go into this unit, the learning outcomes are organized by presentations, and it is easier for you to see which presentation has, what learning outcome in it. And that is why, it is easier for you to identify and look at some of the content that, okay, this is what it is being asked for in this particular task. And that makes it easier for you to, go in and essentially, see what activities or what tasks have to be covered from a point of view of looking at, doing the assignment. So all the 4 learning outcomes, are there. There are some templates which we are going to be looking at using, which I've created, and they are going to be useful for you. Reason being that if you go ahead and use some of these templates, they are going to be helpful for the purposes of understanding how some of these, tasks can be done. And rather than you having to find templates essentially to do some of these activities, the idea would be to try and essentially say, use these, because they are going to be pretty much, specifically related to this particular task. And that is where it will allow you to essentially understand how to go about doing these. So you don't need to find a template. You don't need to go about finding a particular, format. You can just use some of the formats which have been given and provided, and they would then allow you to essentially, hopefully, do the assignment pretty much in a straightforward way. So Unit 6, everything is populated now, including the learning outcome and bits and pieces that we've discussed. I'm going to put the assignment brief towards the bottom, so that this is something that we are discussing now, and also a copy of the presentation, which is the assignment discussion, which hopefully, should be useful for you, because it will allow you to understand what evidence and what, bits you have to create to be able to go about achieving this unit with the grade that you have in mind. So if I look at now just sharing this bit on the assignment presentation and the assignment brief, what we will do is do a bit of discussion on this, and I'll give you some tips and tricks in terms of how to go about essentially completing this particular assignment for this unit. Now, over to the presentation. Feel free to ask me questions as and when you want. Reason being that there are bits that you can help clarify when you ask questions, and there is no right or wrong question. Just don't feel embarrassed. It is anything which comes to your mind, anything you are not sure of, just feel free and ask me questions, and I'll try my best to give you as much information as possible during this session. Now, couple of things that I want to look at before we start this session, very briefly. There are some useful tips that I want to give. Obviously, this particular unit, as you can see, talks about us developing skills and knowledge to be able to understand, how should a person be working within the health and social care sector, or for somebody who's working within the health and social care sector, be responsible for their own personal and professional development. That means trainings, development, skills, upgrading your skills, or sharpening your skills, all is a part and parcel of this particular profession. And you would be looking at essentially at some stage completing bits and pieces to be able to work more effectively within the organization. And that is where this bit comes in of training and development. Now, one of the things which I would also recommend before we start is that at some stage when you start doing the assignment, we would also need to look at getting what is called the declaration of originality. And that declaration of originality can be either filled in soft copy, or it can be done on our website, and that allows you to essentially say that this is an assignment that you have produced. It is not something that has been copied or pasted from elsewhere, and you understand what is plagiarism and what is collusion. Now, this declaration is available on this particular link. If I just quickly share that over onto the website for you to have a look at, it's a link which I will also put in the chat window, so that at some stage when you go in and you want to do and complete the declaration, you should be able to complete that for all the units in one go, and rather than having to do it time and again when you submit your assignments. So here is where you would need to write down your awarding body number, which is normally 603. Some of you have had your own numbers which have been received. For some of you, the numbers might be pending. So if that is the case, then my suggestion would be to essentially, in this case, just write your name so that we know who is the person who's filling in the form. You would need to obviously drop down and choose the course, health and social care. And then when you choose the course, obviously the corresponding unit. And once that has been done, you put your email address, your phone number, and you can sign either, if you're doing it on the phone, Or if you're doing it on the PC, tablet, Mac, there is an option to sign it using the mouse and then click on this arrow, and that should, and you need to tick all these so that you've understood the terms and condition of plagiarism, similarity. And once you've done this, click the submit button, and that would basically submit this originality, or declaration of originality form. This can also be downloaded and filled in as a Word format. There's a Word document which you will see in Moodle, and this can be filled in. It's the exact replica of what I've shown you on the website. This can be filled in by putting your name, your student number, the course that you're doing, level 3 diploma in health and social care, the assignment, which is unit 6, personal and professional development. Tick and check all these boxes, sign at the bottom, and that should be it. Now, when we look at doing the assignment, couple of important tips that I would want to give out just as a bit of a guidance is that make sure that when you start the assignment, you start it with a particular topic or a particular organization in mind. Sometimes some assignment briefs don't give you a scenario. So in this case, it is important that you write a small introduction, and that introduction tends to give a bit of a background of what organization or particular company or, let's say a place of work that you're going to take into account for quoting it as examples or using it for examples when you, start writing your assignment. Now, a bit of introduction is always useful because it sets the tone in terms of how you're submitting your tasks and what has been compiled in the assignment Word document. It gives a bit of a bird's eye view to the assessor, and that is a good practice when you write an introduction and towards the end write a conclusion in terms of what you've learned by studying this particular unit. Now, one of the most important things which allows an assessor to look at marking your assignments quickly and without any problems is that what you need to be able to do is write proper headings and subheadings. So when I write and start doing the assignment, my suggestion would be that you copy and paste the tasks which are given on the Word document, and then underneath that present the assessment, which is important because it allows us to clearly see that you are addressing all the tasks. There is no ambiguity in terms of which tasks have been attempted, and it just clears out any confusion to ensure that what you're trying to achieve as a grade is also something that you're trying to do when you write the tasks out in your assignment, and it becomes abundantly clear for the assessor to see that you've attempted these tasks as per the assignment brief, and marking becomes a bit easier. Now, when you do your assignments, generally, I would recommend a font size of font 12, Arial in particular, or Calibri, whichever font you prefer. Make sure your line spacings are 1.5. Now, in this assignment, I think the approximate word limit that we are looking at is, about 3,500 words. Because there are usages of templates to do some of the activities, the word count could be slightly less. And this is just a recommended word count. Remember, there is grading in this particular course overall, and for this assignment and all assignments that you're going to do in health and social care, they are graded as pass, merit, and distinction. So there are activities that you would need to complete. It's not just that I want to achieve merit and I'll do just the merit activities. No, you have to do all the passes and all the merits and achieve them to be able to achieve a merit grade. And similarly for distinction, everything in terms of all the passes, all the merits, all the distinctions have to be achieved. Now, make sure you write your references to be done using Harvard referencing system, but try and at least get into the habit of referencing your work, whether it's from websites, articles, journals, even UK Versity, presentation slides. And the idea would be to give credit to the author, publisher, the people who have actually created that text. And when you're using it in your own assignment, you are either paraphrasing it, writing it in your own words, and then giving credit towards the end in bibliography, or if you're using direct quotes or essentially using the text as it is from the website or article, presentation, journal, whatever it is, then you're basically referencing it and giving credit to the author by creating a referencing list towards the end. Now, the useful tips basically recommend you to look at focusing on what is called command verbs. Now, these are important because when we look at command verbs, sometimes, when you look at defining or doing the tasks, there is a word which will start the task and it'll ask you to do something. Now, if you know the meaning of that word, and if you follow the meaning of that word to the core, and then do the summation of your task, or creation of your assignment, then it'll basically help you meet the assignment criteria every time, and that would be not requiring any amount of rework at any stage, and that would be useful. So generally speaking, focus on the command verbs. Now, because it's the graded qualification, these words do vary, and the evidence they require also varies. So sometimes you have to articulate and obviously look at writing the context of it, or providing evidence in a particular number of words, and these would generally be in an increasing order. When you go from past tasks tend to be generally write, explain, define, describe. You're free writing about the meaning of the word, definition of the word, or the task which is asking for it, and you're doing it in about 100 to 125 words. When it comes to merit, they normally would be words which will start the task with assess, examine, clarify, analyze, and they generally require a bit more text to be written, because you're building arguments, you're talking about positives, negatives, advantages, disadvantages, and that is where the word limit goes up. And then when you look at distinction criteria, they generally tend to compare, contrast, critically evaluate, or evaluate. And here, apart from doing the definition, the advantages, disadvantages, pros and cons, or talking about negatives and positives, you have to look at putting in arguments to then finally conclude and take a decision that whether, when we talk about comparison, you have to compare two things, otherwise you won't be able to compare. When you contrast, again, you have to contrast two or more things to be able to look at the advantages on one, disadvantages on the other, and then put a meaningful conclusion down, that why you are going with this or why you agree with this. And that is where you need to build your arguments and your evidence, and that is why the word limit again goes up. So here is where you would need to focus on command verbs, and they would then help you understand how you're compiling the evidence for the tasks that you are doing. Now, if I go into, after this, discussing the assignment brief, there's a bit of a background given in the assignment which talks about you need to consider your own potential career. So that means the most important bit that you have to look at when you start doing this assignment, you have to have a consideration in your mind that you're looking at your own health and social career in a particular country. So if I'm based in Dubai, or if I'm based in UK, if I'm based in Ghana, if I'm based in Nigeria, or if I'm based elsewhere in Pakistan, I would need to be looking at, understanding what is the career that I'm going to undertake within the health and social care sector within a chosen country. And looking at that, you would need to, with that in mind, you would need to look at career opportunities for professional development, and then look at how you would prepare yourself to take up that chosen role. Now, with that in mind, so there is a context to it, is that I can't just go about doing this assignment without having a career or a role in mind, that this is what I want to do in health and social care sector. Now, if I don't have that, I will find it difficult to do the assignment. Now, if I know that I want to become a nurse, or if I know I want to become a healthcare professional, or if I know I want to become a occupational therapist, or I want to become a physiotherapist, or I want to become a healthcare worker, then I clearly know that this is the role that I would be getting into. And then I would look at undertaking an evaluation of my skills, doing my skills audit, doing my SWOT analysis, to see what qualities, skills I have, and what are the skills and qualities which are required to get into that job role as per a job description, and then put a plan in place to work to build those skills and those attributes, so that I can then successfully land that job and start working as that particular role in the sector. So essentially, when we talk about starting the assignment, have a career role in mind, look at what you want to do, and then what we need to be able to do with that in mind is look at basically evaluating ourself from a point of view of looking at how do we plan, organize, do time management, look at research, gathering information, note taking, summarizing, look at our analysis of our own skills, and that is in terms of written skills, academic skills, referencing skills, IT skills, and towards the end, we will also look at doing what is called a reflection to say, with a bit of hindsight, if I had this knowledge, I would have done this like this, or what are the things that I've learned by studying this unit. That would be a bit of a reflection that we would need to get into towards the end of the assignment. Now, with that background in mind, we need to start to doing some tasks. So task 1 basically talks about further to the research on your careers and job roles in health and social care sector within a chosen country. You should now write an outline of the range of careers and job roles in health and social care organization. So here is where, if you go into the learning outcome 1 presentation, I had basically provided a summary of, I think 18, 19 different career options, which you can look at taking up within the health and social care sector. Now, these career roles that we talked about were categorized into 4 or 5 different categories. So they were categorized into, I don't know how many of you recall, but this task, if you refer to the presentation of learning outcome 1 and task 1.1, you would essentially be able to, find this task in that presentation. So here we talked about a lot of different types of roles. So here we categorize them into, excuse me, direct care roles. Within the direct care roles, there are these kind of roles which I summarized. There are management roles. There are other support care roles, which are roles that you can take up within this sector. And then you have the regulated professional roles, people who deal with compliance, standards, frameworks, and there are these kind of roles which are there. Now, as an activity in this particular, and then you have any other role which is an ancillary role, which is working with the health and social care sector or within the health and social care sector, and that was also given. Now, there was an activity which I had given at that point in time when we were discussing this particular learning outcome, and that was basically looking at undertaking the short survey or a questionnaire on the NHS website to try and find out basis your attributes, your skills, your liking and your preferences, what could be the suggested role that you would be able to take up within health and social care sector. Now, I've had this back only from one learner. I would probably name that, but just she has presented, and given, taken this survey and has essentially then presented a screenshot, which I'd requested everyone to provide, and that would become a part and parcel of your evidence for this particular role. Now, she has done this meticulously. She has taken a screenshot, a couple of screenshots which came out towards the end of the survey, and they have been very well documented. And this is what I would have suggested that you could have also done. And if you haven't done so far, my suggestion would be that when it talks about write an outline, you would need to write it as a Word document, which you can do from the PowerPoint presentation, and then maybe towards the end, attach a screenshot of it to say that this is the survey that I've taken up, and with the survey that I've taken up, these are the roles which have been suggested, and from the roles, from these suggested roles, I am going to be looking at taking up this particular role in the health and social care sector, and that would form a very good context of how you would go about, essentially, let's say, doing this particular task. So I'm going to try and bring that across on the website, on the screen for somebody who sent that over to me diligently. And I would have expected, some of the others to also do that. But if you haven't done so far, my suggestion would be that go ahead and do it. And because this would also give you insight into how you would look at the various roles within the health and social care sector. So if I just briefly show you the screenshot, this is how, when you do the survey towards the end, these are the kind of roles which will come up. So depending on the questions that you've answered, it'll suggest you some roles, and they, are going to be a good match to basically look at writing about an outline of the career options or job roles that you can take up in health and social care. So if you haven't done so, I would suggest go about, taking that survey. And then once you've done that survey, then the idea would be to try and essentially, use that screenshot towards the end to present what has been found, and that would be a useful, I would say, thing or an activity to do. So here, if I put that link across again, this is the one that I was mentioning, and I would suggest that if you haven't done so far, go ahead and do this, so that this will give you an insight in terms of what roles you're suited with as far as the health and social care sector is concerned in terms of career. Now, the next task talks about progression within a chosen field. So here again, if I go into, task 1.2, there are lots of different types of roles that you can go into and discuss about progression. So assuming when you took that particular survey, and that survey resulted in you looking at more showing preference towards registered or compliance related regulated roles, then what you could do is go out and explain how you would look at preparing yourself by writing in about a couple of words. I would say, when I say explain, about 75 to 100 words, to say how would you develop your career and progress it into that direction. So here again, if I look at taking you back to the slide, what I'm going to do is share the full screen, because it'll be helpful for me to not switch over between a couple of screens from now and then during our discussion. But if you see this, generally, this is the task which was being spoken about. And here, as you can see, it tells you in detail, the roles that you would need to look at for elaborating as a progression. So here, somebody comes up with the option in the survey that you've been recommended to look at regulatory roles. You would look at maybe taking up a registered manager role or a compliance manager role, and that role and the progression activities could be explained by looking into some parts of the slides covered in Learning Outcome 1. The third part talks about identifying the standards which are required for professional development. Now, we discussed this in terms of the standards to be, talked about, and they were discussed in the Learning Outcome, 2, because this is assessment criteria of Learning Outcome, 2, essentially, that we need to discuss. And this talks about, the standards, which are national frameworks, the occupational standards, and they essentially, look into what is called various acts and legislations that we have spoken about and discussed in Learning Outcome 2, which need to be covered here for the purposes of discussing, this particular assessment criteria. So if I go into identifying the standards, as you can rightly see, so let me just open everything up and reduce everything. So in this case, the Professional Standards Authority and the CQC, which are the two main bodies in the health and social care sector, which basically looks at setting the standards. And when they look at setting the standards, we need to be able to discuss a few standards here to complete this particular task, which is task 2.1. So essentially, some of the standards, there are lots of them, but some of the main ones that I'd covered are there on the Learning Outcome 2 presentation. And these are what you need to summarize and put across to be able to cover this particular task, which is task 2.1. So if you see, this is assessment criteria 2.1. This one is assessment criteria 1.2. And this one, if you do, is assessment criteria 1.1. So you have to refer to Learning Outcome 1 presentation, here Learning Outcome 1 presentation 1.2, and here Learning Outcome 2 presentation 2.1. Now, any questions at this stage? Okay, now if you look at task 2, there are a couple of assessment criteria that we have to discuss in task 2, and it talks about need for continuous professional development. Now, when we talk about need for continuous professional development, this is something that we have covered primarily in our presentation or Learning Outcome 3, because this generally corresponds to, Learning Outcome 2, and it corresponds to criteria 2.2. So when we look at the need for continuous professional development, we need to be looking at understanding and putting down reasons here. So when I talk about reasons, what you will need to essentially do in this case is talk about why do we need CPD, why CPD is important. You will need to give an example of CPD in terms of, how planning and development is, or training and development is planned by the employer, and why is it important in your area of work. So if you've decided that, the first part of the assignment brief, if you remember, talks about you identifying a potential career. So if you identify yourself as a social worker, then why is it important for you to train within this particular sector as a social worker? What are the mandatory trainings that you need to undertake? What are the key compliances, standards, and legislation that you need to be aware of? They all need to be summarized here in order to ensure that you are looking at a formal process of development which is continuous, and that allows you to work efficiently and productively and meet the requirements of your role. Now here, in order to assess the CPD in health and social care, I'd also mentioned that you could look at a template which could be used for discussing what is called your CPD or your career professional development plan. Now, there was a template which was uploaded on Moodle, and there is a version of that template which essentially I had put in as a screenshot, and they would be useful for you to look at putting it here for the purposes of, essentially, I would say, completing this particular task. Now, the next one talks about what is reflective practice. So again, this particular task criteria is covered in Learning Outcome 3 presentation, which is 3.1, and it talks about the theoretical process of why reflective practice is important within the health and social care sector. How is it closely linked when we talked about, reflective practice in teaching, medicine, some professions like A&E, fire and ambulance service, and fire services, ambulances, and also as a healthcare sector in general. What is reflective practice? It is the ability to be able to reflect one's action when you're engaging in the process of continuous learning. So here it's just explaining the term. So my suggestion here would be to look at writing about 75 to 100 words just to explain the term reflective practice. And that is covered in assessment criteria 3.1 in Learning Outcome 3. Then it comes to explaining the theoretical models of reflective practice. When we talk about the theoretical models of reflective practice, it is basically assessment criteria 3.2. And these models, basically, if you recall, I had mentioned the Klobb's learning cycle, and then Honey and Mumford's, learning style questionnaire. So I don't know how many of you remember this, but again, there was an activity which was given here. And I know that one of the learners did the activity. She took a screenshot of it, and it came out with 4 different, suggested 4 different types of, processes of learning. So are you a reflector, activist, pragmatist, or a theorist? So one of the activities which was suggested essentially was that you could end up taking up that particular questionnaire, and at some stage then look at, sending it over as a screenshot to say that this is something that you have completed. And that would have been really good, because I have one learner who has actually gone ahead and obviously done a screenshot of it, suggested, what kind of activity that, what kind of reflective style that she recommends. And obviously that was really helpful, because it allowed us to understand, by undertaking that questionnaire, that, what style is the best style, which basically you reflect and how you learn. And that was essentially, Honey and Mumford's learning style questionnaire that we did. And there was a test which I'd asked you to do, or a survey that I asked you to undertake, and that was from here. Now, if you look at this particular link which I put in, that allows you to take about 40 odd questions. And that towards the end, when you answer these 40 odd questions, what it does for you is essentially, gives you an outcome that this is what my learning style is. And that is something going to be good as far as, putting it together as an evidence in your work, because it will show that this is something that you have done and you have undertaken, and that would be quite useful. So as you can see, this was this 40 questionnaire, and towards the end, no right and wrong answers, but just answer them honestly in terms when you read them. And towards the end, it gives you what style reflects your learning style and preference. And that is a screenshot that you need to take. And that would be nicely completing this particular task when you explain the theoretical models, and then later on put that as a screenshot towards the end. Now, the next task talks about, outlining the stages in planning your own personal and professional development. So this was a task related to, 3M1. It's a merit task essentially, or a task 3.3, which basically talks about, reflecting or basically providing the outline essentially, for the stages in planning your own personal and professional development. Now, when we talk about this particular task, what we are looking at essentially is the assessment criteria 4.1. And for that, what you need to do is go into the learning outcome 4 presentation. And in learning outcome 4 presentation, we talked about the SOARS acronym, which is primarily an acronym for selecting an area of development, putting SMART objectives, defining the action or activities that you're going to take, how do you record your progress, creating a timeline, and then seeing whether these are sustainable development objectives for you. And this is what is required to be completed in this task. So here you're outlining the stages, outlining of the stages primarily of your personal development plan using, SOARS is what is required to be done in this. Again, the use of the template of PDP would be useful here because it'll help you, define these stages. And I put an example, and I've also put a blank version of it, which you can use for basically completing this task. Now, the next one talks about explain how to identify your own developmental needs. Now, for this, what I recommended was, this is AC 4.2. Here is what I recommended, that you go about doing your, skills audit, and you basically look at doing an audit to understand what are the areas that you need to develop yourself on. So learning and development is a continuous process, and sometimes in order to look at identifying your needs, you look at 3 areas that we talked about. One is taking feedback from your managers, supervisors, your colleagues, doing a bit of reflection, and doing skills audit. Now, for taking feedback and reflection, obviously you'll need to cover this theoretically because it's only asking you to explain. So you are going to mention these 2 techniques through which you identify your development needs. For skills audit, you're going to be looking at filling a template, and that is, something which I've given in a Word document, and a copy of this is also on the presentation. So if you look at filling that Word document in terms of doing your own skills audit in certain areas that we have looked at, and these certain areas which you see listed down here, organization of learning, information skills, note-taking and reading, writing skills, are all related to the initial part of the assignment, which you see is what it is asking you to consider. So things like planning, organizing, note-taking, researching, written skills, spoken communication, your IT skills are all a part and parcel of this particular skills audit template. And this skills audit template, is something which I put onto Moodle. And I would suggest that you look at particularly using this Word document of the skills audit template, and then essentially fill this up, because this will allow you to complete, this particular task nicely with regards to, filling it up. So that would be attached as evidence. And this, when it is attached as evidence, would be useful to complete, this task, which is 4.2. Now, the next task essentially talks about you talking about SMART targets. So how do you set targets? And when you set these targets, how do you go about, essentially, making sure that these targets are meaningful, they are measurable, they are achievable, they're realistic and time-bound. And this is something which is again covered in, Learning Outcome 4 presentation and Task 4.3. And that has a template that I've also provided. Again, here I've given a filled sample, which is to say, how would you go about doing Harvard referencing skills? So if this is a SMART target that you're setting for your own area of personal development, how are you going to measure it? How are you going to achieve it? How is it going to be time-bound? When are you going to achieve it? In how many days or weeks you're going to achieve it? That is what you need to fill in for this particular template. Now, because it talks about, again, explain, so you're theoretically covering it in about 75 to 100 words. You can use this particular template to give an example. And that could be, for example, I'm looking at developing the skill of academic writing, how to write assignments. So here again, the smart target template could be used to fill this up, and that would allow you to achieve task 4.3. So any questions on this so far? Right. Now, if I go into the extension activities which are given in the assignment brief, the first ones under task 2, there are 2 activities. One is, it is asking you to basically look at, completing 2 tasks. So these 2 essentially are, 3M1 and looking at basically, 3D1. So in 3M1, it talks about learning outcome 3. We need to go into presentation, the merit activity, and it talks about how do you look at reflective practice and why is it important when you talk about reflective practice for professional development. So here you're going to be assessing. When I talk about assessing, you're talking about how, what is reflective practice? Why is it important? How do you look at using this as a process to improve, your delivery in terms of your role within the health and social care sector, in terms of looking at, your attitudes, your beliefs, your values, the cultural background that you come from, and how do you use them to primarily, help deliver, you say, for example, your work or your daily day-to-day activities. And this is something which is explained primarily in, these few slides, which is slide 37 to 38, and it talks about this particular process of reflective practice. Now, what we need to be able to do is, if I give an example, so here we are talking about, why reflective practice, because when you work within health and social care sector, you're working with a lot of teams, you're working with a lot of colleagues, they are coming from different departments, different teams. So you could look at and taking an example essentially here to talk about multidisciplinary teams and, how you would essentially look at working with other colleagues within this particular, within the particular department that you work in, and how that would help you in, say, for example, picking up some best practices or picking up techniques that would help you in doing your day-to-day job more effectively and more productively. So this is a theoretical task wherein you would need to look at talking about reflective practice by taking an example, and that would allow you to complete the process of assessment, because assessment, essentially requires you, when I talk about assessment in general, it is going to ask you to essentially, basically look at a particular, let's say, example, and then talk about the ability to be able to, assess it. That means that you look at some of your needs, you assess them, and then you go about putting a plan together in terms of how you would go about overcoming them, or basically, if I have a weakness or if I have a gap area, then how would I look at, you do the assessment to find out that this is a gap area, or this is the thing that this is the skill that I don't have, and I need to be able to develop this skill. I need to have knowledge about this particular area in order to do my job effectively. And that is done or discovered through the process of assessment. Now, when we talk about a distinction, there is one criteria, which is 3D1. And this one talks about essentially, benefits of reflective practice, which is also given and summarized nicely in these slides in Learning Outcome 3. Self-assessment allows you to, or basically reflective practice allows you to understand what are the areas of improvement that you need, in what areas you need to develop your knowledge. It talks about how you go about, building knowledge, let's say, and looking at practice, essentially putting that knowledge into practice. Sorry, so look at basically developing that, the knowledge that you've got by undertaking some activities, how you put them into practice in terms of your work. And then largely it helps you in dealing with problems or dealing with areas that you would essentially feel that if you didn't have the training or you didn't have the coaching and mentoring which has been done by your colleagues, then it wouldn't have been possible for you to carry out these tasks because you would have had no experience of it. And that also looks at the process of reflective practice. Over a point in time, obviously, it helps you develop your personal characteristics. And this is what you would need to look at putting together in the assignment when we talk about benefits of reflective practice. Now we come to the last task in the assignment brief, which is task 3. Now, task 3 essentially is looking at a couple of assessment criteria from learning outcome 3, 2, and 4. And they would focus on the merit and distinction criteria in the extension activities, but generally looking at, again, going back to the first part, which I mentioned, that you need to be able to choose a specific career role or a pathway in health and social care sector, because that will make it easier for you to talk in the context of doing the assignment. I wouldn't want you to talk in general. So it is important for you to talk about a specific role, and that will be following through in the assignment when you look at, presenting a CPD plan, or you talk about doing another activity task, which is to look at reflective practice. So if I'm a health and social care worker and I go and provide care domiciliary, or I go and, provide care to patients at home, and obviously look at even providing care to elderly, then when I look at doing a reflective process, I would be looking at reflective activities that I do in my day-to-day job. And that would be helpful for me because I'm not writing generically about various roles, but I'm talking very specific about a particular role when I'm doing my assignment. And this will help you keep a word limit as well. And that is why it is important to identify one role that you feel you would want to take up as a career in this sector, and that would allow you to pinpoint and talk about specifically that role when you do these tasks. Now, when we talk about analyze skills and knowledge primarily related to your let's say the first task in this part, you're looking at primarily talking about task 1.3, which is looking at your identification of skills and knowledge that you need to have to be able to work in that particular role. Now, the reason I say that this is required is because of the fact that when you talk about the assessment criteria 1.3 in learning outcome 1, it specifically helps you analyze the skills and knowledge you need in the role that you want to do. So that is where we looked at doing a SWOT analysis, and the SWOT analysis was useful because it allowed you to understand that if I want to work as a healthcare professional, then what are the qualities I need to have? What are the various attributes my personality need to have to be able to work in this particular role? So this bit that you look at in terms of, task 1.3, again, keeping in mind a particular role, like as a healthcare professional, a particular role, you need to be able to do your SWOT analysis, and you need to be using your skills audit to reflect on that these are the specific skills I need to be able to, do my role in health and social care. Now, here is where I had essentially also shared a particular template, which is labeled as task 1.3. And this particular template, which I've opened up right now, is up on Moodle. And this template basically allows you to assume that I'm going to work as a social care worker, and then allows you to carry out your knowledge and skills audit, which is directly related to this particular task. So some of you, for all of you, what I would suggest is undertaking this skills audit by, either putting a check mark, cross, or an asterisk to say that I need these skills wherein I have little or no capability. I have further capability, but I have full capability. So basically like a beginner, intermediate, and an advanced stage in terms of a ranking. And then in some cases, if you do not have capability, then you put a date down here to say by what date I would like to address this by, and then what date I would like to complete it. And they take a route of doing your skills audit, and then in the second part, doing your knowledge audit, which is for that particular specific role. Now, this is something specifically for a health and social care worker. So if you fill this up, that will basically be with a bit of commentary. complete your task for task 1.3. Now, the next one talks about analysis of your role and impact of your own values, beliefs. And this one is task 3.3, which is, in the learning outcome presentation 3.3. And here is where I've talked in detail about a number of slides looking into, your own values and beliefs. So there were a lot of questions that I've asked, and there are no right or wrong answers, but generally they help you understand what are your own attitude, what is your attitude towards a particular role, what are your values, what are your beliefs, and how they will manifest out when you work within a particular setting of health and social care sector. So this task looks at analysis. So here again, you have to put in a lot of arguments, which I've tried to put through questions. The answers to those questions basically help you build those arguments, and it helps you understand what is personal attitude, what is values, what is beliefs, and this is what needs to be covered within this particular task. Now, the next one talks about reflecting your own learning, which is task 3.4 of learning outcome 3. So here you need to reflect on how you've gone about studying this particular unit and what you have learned from this particular unit in detail. And that would primarily be how that would help you, the knowledge that you've gained from this unit, and how that would help you essentially get into the role that you're looking at within the health and social care sector. So this bit is, again, personal. You have to write it from your own perspective, that how do you look at your own learning? Are you able to manage your own learning? Then in that case, you are able to follow what is called self-managed learning as a process. Is your learning led by the employer? That means you get into training and development, and that is an optimum scenario for you to pick up new skills, information, and knowledge required to work within your role. Is your training, and what are the forms through which you actually do, your learning? And they could be things that you write about when we talk about reflect your own learning. Now, the last part of this task basically talks about creating your personal development plan, which is AC 4.4. So here is where you would need to use this particular template, which I put in for CPD. And that particular template for CPD essentially allows you to, develop what is called your personal development plan. Now, when we talk about the personal development plan, there is a Word template that I put in on Moodle, and that Word template can also be used. The first 3 pages talk about what is a PDP, how to develop a PDP, what information goes into PDP, things like activities that you're going to put in place, timelines, how you're going to go about doing these activities, and what these activities will result in. That means the crux, what will they help you learn, is what is given in that template. So here, a PDP or a personal development plan has to be done. For the important part is for a chosen career role. So keep that in mind. It is for a chosen career role. That means you have to have a particular career in mind. If it's a healthcare worker, it's an occupational therapist, it is a healthcare professional, a nurse, a doctor, a GP, a radiologist, whatever you think of, you have to keep that in mind and develop the plan accordingly. It cannot be a generic plan, because a generic plan will not meet the criteria for this particular task. So use the template, create a specific plan for that role, and you could do it as a heading on the top here to say, I'm developing my PDP for the chosen career in my role, which is healthcare assistant, HCA. And that would be okay. And then you list down the number of activities and use this plan template to create that PDP plan. Now, in the extension activities, we are essentially looking at a couple of activities that we are looking at doing, and they would cover 2M1. So essentially assessing your own continuous professional development in a chosen healthcare career role. So this task is here, in a chosen career role. So essentially that one. And the second one is the AC 4.1, which is the merit for learning outcome 4 M1. And those are the bits that you're covering in the extension activities. Now, again, this is asking you to carry out your skills audit. So if you fill that template, which I've shown you, either for the healthcare worker or the generic skills audit template, which is given, in the learning outcome 4, this one is a Word document, that will straight away complete your merit task. You don't need to do anything. You've carried out your skills audit. And here, when it talks about assessing the continuous professional development requirement for a chosen health and social career role, again, the key part, in a chosen role. So here, developing the PDP template, which is this template for a particular career role, would actually do your 2M1. So if you create this template and you put it as an evidence, that will do your 2M1. So it is actually hitting 2 birds with 1 stone. If you detail it out and create the PDP as in a chosen career, that will not just meet task 4.4, but it also will mean you're doing 2M1 to a certain extent. Now, what is the difference between assess and create? So the difference here is that when you assess, that means you will go in and check. Now here, if I had given a timeline that I'd complete this task in 6 months, what you will do is when you assess, you will create another column here, and that will say that whether you have achieved it or not achieved. If you have not achieved it, then you'll put a further timeline to say that this is something that I'm going to reassess in 3 months' time to see if I've gained that particular, thing or not. So I will show you this reason being, this is important because there's a slight bit of differentiation between the one that you're going to do when you create in 4.4, and then later on when you essentially, do this from a point of view of review. So I would use this particular template, which essentially is going to be useful, and I'll put it in the PowerPoint slide because they would help you do the assessment. So I'll put this template here, and this assessment template, as you can see, the difference is when we create the PDP, this is the part that we do. Now, when we assess it, we go ahead and review that. So basically what we have done is, if I put Harvard referencing here and I put a target of 6 weeks to learn, I'm going to do 3 activities like watch a presentation, watch a YouTube video, go about, practicing how to reference from website. Second activity, reference from article or journal. Third activity, do a referencing from a book or a website. Now, once you do these 3 activities and you watch the presentation and you go about reading the Harvard referencing style presentation and watching the video, if you are not able to successfully do it, then what you will do is you'll put a date of review that I'll review this on, say, 1st of January. Now, assuming with these 3 activities completed, you're able to do it, that would mean that I'm happy and I've achieved the skill. I've got the skill now. I need to practice a bit more to refine my skill, but essentially I've understood how to reference it. Now, if you feel that you haven't been able to do it, so that is what is called the review or the assessment. And these will mean that we will need to add 3 more, 1 or 2 more columns to it. And that is when I would do the assessment of my PDP. So progress that I made, if I say I've made good progress, I would say it here. If there are further tasks and activities that I need to do, I will list them down here. And then I will put a new date down for the timeline in which I would like to achieve them. So instead of 1st January, I feel I've done these tasks and activities. I know now 50% of it. I'm 50% confident, but I still need a couple of more weeks to do. And what I'll do is list down some of the activities here. Say, for example, I will take some professional help from the tutor. I will maybe use a site, which is going to be a site referencing which is basically a reference generator site, and try and generate more references for another 2 assignments before I say that I've completely mastered the art of being able to reference using Harvard referencing system. And then you'll put a date down of March, say 2023 here, and that would be the assessment part of it for meeting the merit criteria. So developing the PDP, 50-60% of your job done, and then adding the 2 next columns to say if you've achieved it. If not, then add further activities, and then a date to which while you'll be able to achieve it, would help you achieve the assessment criteria merit, which is looking at assessing your CPD or a continuous development plan for the purposes of this particular task. Now, any questions on this for discussion or further doubts that you have, please feel free to ask me now. Any questions that you have related to the assignment? Right, okay. So that should nicely let you get into the assignment. And then what I would do is primarily look at putting a date down, say of 15th January, to be able to submit this assignment to us, the draft, and I would suggest that you email this across to learnerwork@ukversity.co.uk. And if you have any questions with regards to doing the assignment and obviously looking at, any further queries, then feel free to get in touch. And what I will do is revert to you on the email with regards to, completing this part of the unit. And then for those of you who are, continuing with us in the new year, we will be looking at starting a new unit, and that will be, the schedule for that would be sent across to you on the 4th or 5th of January when we come back after the Christmas break. So take some time to relax and obviously enjoy the break with your family, hopefully relax, and then we will see you in the new year. So wishing you all a very Merry Christmas and a season's greeting in terms of a Happy New Year. And I will catch up with you guys, in the new year in the first session, which will typically be around the week starting 9th of January.
Thank you, Mr. Singh.
Thank you. No worries. Thanks for this. Anybody else, any questions, any contributions on the session, do let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to close this session and then I'll catch up with you next in the new year.
Thank you.